Hey guys, Zan here. I just recorded my conversation with Adam at Shaps Cards, and it ran a little bit longer than expected. So what we are going to do is split episodes up this week, and have just this collector conversation episode, and then Ryan and I will release a separate episode with our normal segments, so that we don't give you some 2-hour episode. But this is a great conversation with Adam. I learned a lot about what he likes, what he collects, and how to do big trades in general. So I hope you guys enjoy it. All right, guys, I am here with Adam at Shaps Cards on Instagram. Adam, it's your podcast debut. Thanks for joining us. How are you feeling tonight?
Feeling great. Really happy to be here with you, Zan. And I know we've been talking cards for a while now, and just our passion for 90s cards in particular. So it's really kind of neat to be able to finally get to kind of talk face to face and do this in a podcast format. So thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I knew as soon as we started this, I knew I wanted to get you on just because you have um, some things to offer that I don't think many other guests can offer. And one of those big things that we're talking about is trades and some of the big trades that you've been a part of. And that's always fascinating me because I'm not someone who's really good at trading. I have a hard time letting go. So we'll definitely dive into that. But I guess the first thing where best place to start is sort of when did you first get into collecting? I assume it was as a kid. And what were you focusing on at that time? And was trading something that you like to do?
Yeah, so I really started collecting at a very early age, and that was pretty much in I would say around the mid to late 80s, which was, as you can imagine, the height of the junk wax era. So, but I just loved collecting baseball cards. I mean, I think that's where a lot of us have kind of started from originally. So, I'm collecting those players from that era like Canseco and McGuire and Bonds and things like that, and obviously Topps baseball was the big thing back then. I can remember 1989. That was when the Upper Deck debuted, and the Ken Griffey Jr. card was just the it card, the chase card. It was so big at that time. And then also right around that time was the David Robinson card, the David Robinson rookie from Hoops. So those two cards were really big at that time, and that kind of fueled my continued passion for collecting. I was collecting primarily baseball, but did basketball as well. And then still going into the early 90s, still a lot of junk wax. But then you had that Leaf set that came out, that 1990 Leaf set baseball, where you had the Frank Thomas rookie card, the Sammy Sosa, the Dave Justice, all of those, and some other big players too from that era. And then right after that, 1992, you had the Fleer Ultra set debut. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Cards like this, they had the kind of almost like the shine or whatever because of the texture on the cards, as opposed to, it was like that glossy shine as opposed to that matte feel with traditional cards from the 80s. So that was really neat. The interesting thing though with all those cards is you didn't really have a lot of these rare inserts, and that goes back to the junk wax. They're starting to introduce nicer cards at that time, but not the rare inserts or the parallels. So you get a pack and you just be getting, maybe your favorite player or your duplicates of your favorite player, but that was still fun and exciting. So that's kind of where my collecting journey started, and it's kind of just continued and progressed from there. Obviously with breaks in between, but yeah, that's where it originated, I would say.
That's awesome. So it's funny you mentioned the like those early '90s sets. I was thinking about the Frank Thomas and the no name on front, and some of the stuff I've been reading lately about some of these late '90s sets in these Beckett's going back to the beginning of their release. A lot of the collectors who were player collectors were kind of upset by some of these finite print runs because there was this mentality of I've got to get everything and I need to be, and now that there's all these one of ones and these cards numbered to 20, I'm never gonna get them, and I might as well just give up. Did you were you ever a player collector as a kid, or did you do team collecting, or was it just sort of I'll kind of get anything?
Kind of a mixture of both. I mean, I would say probably player collector first and foremost, and that was at that time it was Frank Thomas, and that's kind of carried on to me to this day because of those early childhood memories. But to your point, yeah, collecting the set was kind of a big objective or goal at that time, just because you didn't have a lot of the rare cards. So if you were trying to do something or take on a challenge or something to build toward, you would try to complete that set. But to your point, yeah, when you had some of these error cards or cards that maybe just were really difficult to come by, that made it a little bit more challenging to do that. And then obviously as we evolve, then you start getting all these super rare inserts, then that starts to become almost impossible to do.
So I look at your page, and it's one of my favorite pages on Instagram. If you guys haven't looked at it, check it out. But when we were talking to Andy a few weeks ago, his approach kind of reminds me of your approach, which is it's varied and it's different from mine. And I see obviously the Thomas stuff, but I see stars from the 90s, and it's probably 75, 80% 90s, and then you've got some modern stuff too. So tell me a little bit about your current approach to collecting and sort of when that changed.
Yeah, so definitely, and you're right. Currently, it's very, very focused on 90s, late 90s, especially those rare inserts, whether it be like the PMGs, the rubies, credentials, essential credentials. Definitely did not used to be that way, and probably only more recently became that within the past, I would say, maybe 5 years or so, 5, 6 years, give or take. Um, I think as we all do in our collecting journeys, we take pauses and we take breaks. So I missed out on a lot of those collecting in the late '90s. My collecting, at least from childhood, kind of veered off, or I would say teetered off, probably around the mid '90s or so. I was starting to get older, closer to graduating high school, things of that nature. So priorities, goals, shifts, all those things changed. And I think a lot of us are impacted and affected in terms of our age and when we're collecting and the time when we get into it and we kind of take those pauses. So I started, I would say, getting back into it fairly heavily around the early 2000s. And this was kind of around in 2003 when LeBron was coming into the league, and there was all the hype around him, and Exquisite debuted, and it was just unheard of at that time to have a pack, basically one pack of cards, 5 cards, be retail for $500. That was nuts. Everybody was kind of like, "Oh my gosh, this is crazy," but I think people were still intrigued, and I missed out on getting one of those packs in 2003. So I made it my goal to at least get one the next year in 2004. And so I remember my one of the local shops, hobby shops. I put my name in the list, and they got them in, and they had a pack for me at 2004 NBA Exquisite. I bought it. I paid the $500, and I remember opening it, and I got a LeBron James 1 of 1 printing plate. So it wasn't autographed, but still a cool card. I thought I hit the lottery. I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is LeBron James!" Although it's a second year card, I didn't realize that printing plates, especially non-autographed ones, are not as desirable. So I did end up selling that card down the line at some point. But that around that time is when I got back into the hobby. I was really, my focus was collecting rookie autos. That was really kind of what my main focus was, and that probably carried with me, I would say, all the way up until around 2018, 2019, where that was kind of my main focus. And of course, there were pauses in between there. But to kind of more to your point and to answer your question, when we got to 2019, there wasn't a lot of like hobby content around there. People were just starting to get into that space. One of the big ones that I was listening to around that time was House of Jordans with Chris and Christina, and just his passion for not only Michael Jordan cards, but primarily 90s insert Jordans. Really, I was just fascinated by it. And I hadn't really been exposed to cards from that era until that time. And so I remember seeing some of these, like the Jordan Noise Boys and the Jordan, the 96 cut above. And I was like, wow, these cards are just incredible. And I started delving into that a little bit more. And it was kind of off and running from there. And one of the things that I really key in on was, well, there a lot of people are really passionate about 90s basketball inserts, but you didn't see as much with that in the football and baseball space. And so I was looking at some of these other cards from 90s, late 90s baseball, late 90s football, and I was like, wow, well, these cards are really neat too. And I loved collecting baseball as a kid, and obviously football as well. And so let me delve into that as well. And I was able to pick up some of these cards for just what prices you would laugh at today. I mean, it was crazy, and it's funny to think. You think about only just a few years ago. I mean, a lot of these cards that you could have maybe for a couple $100 or whatever, going for tens of thousands now. It's nuts. It's insane. And even the rare 90s Jordan inserts back then, they were pricey, but they weren't anything like what they are now. I mean, we've gone from like cards that would sell between 5 to 20,000 now are selling for hundreds of thousands. Is pretty insane when you think about it.
It really is. That things have changed so much, and it's so funny you say that because you got some serious grails before the boom, and it seems like every week someone is beating down your door via DMs trying to get you to sell something, whether it's a 98 PMG or something, and you've held off remarkably well. But there are two cards I want to ask you about. We were talking about it off air, and you have some interesting acquisition stories. So tell us what those two cards are and the story behind your acquisition of each.
The Randy Moss credentials, um, that was a card that I saw, and I was just like, wow, this card is incredible. And it had actually sold a couple times within the past year. I acquired it in 2019, and it for whatever reason, and I think there's two gem mint copies. So there's two 9.5 copies of that card. I think there's actually two PSA 10 copies of that card as well. And it's sold recently, and I had just gotten back. So I attended the National in 2019. It's the first and only National I've attended. I haven't been back, but I'd love to go back. And it popped up for sale again. I remember it just sold the beginning of the year, and I was like, wow, I gotta have this card. And I remember bidding on it, and I it literally just went for right under my high max bid, and I was so happy to get that card. And it's definitely one of my favorites, probably in the top five. It's a card that I can't imagine ever selling or trading, so that one for sure. And then the Randy Johnson PMG. So uh, that card. So I lived in Seattle. I lived in Seattle from I want to say I moved out there 2017. I was there from 2017 to 2021, and I remember that card getting listed on eBay for buy it now, really reasonable buy it now price. And I was looking at that card, and it was the first time I'd ever seen it where it had the Space Needle in the background. And I know there's other PMGs that have that Space Needle image in the background, but I had never seen the Randy Johnson before. I'd never seen it look like that, with a kind of a landscape view, just him lining up for a pitch. I mean, with the Seattle skyline, just perfect imagery. And I remember thinking to myself, "Gosh, that card is amazing." And I let a day or two pass, and then it ended up selling for best offer. So it ended up going well under what the buy it now price was, and I just remember kicking myself, like, what in the world was I thinking? Like that card is just amazing, and it just has meaning to me because I've been living here in Seattle. I can see the Space Needle from my condo where I'm living. I have a view of it. I see it every day. And I was like, why did I not try to go after that car? And I think we all have those kind of stories where you see something and for whatever reason, maybe you don't act and just kind of kick yourself and you regret it and you lament it. But lo and behold, it probably wasn't even a month later, I saw it pop up on Instagram um, under uh, MK Sports Cars. I think we all know him. He's just got an amazing, incredible collection. And I messaged him right away, and I just said, "Hey, are you? Is this something you might consider making available?" And he was he was like, "Yeah, you know." And we talked, and we were able to come to a deal within probably not even minutes. It was really, really easy, really smooth. And I was just so happy I did that because I think sometimes when we see cards that we like or we want, especially we see a lot of this stuff on Instagram, we maybe we're sometimes maybe a little reluctant to reach out to people because you don't want to be presumptuous, especially if somebody's not actively advertising something for sale. But I think the best thing is, hey, it doesn't hurt to ask. And if I would have never asked, I would have never known, and I would have never had a chance to get that card. And I mean, it's something that you just don't see. I think there's been like one that's come up for sale publicly within the past 5 years since then. So yeah, it's those kind of rare cards are special, and you just if you pass on the opportunity, you may not get the second chance. Unfortunately, I did in this instance.
That's very fortunate because I was about to say what you just said, which is that that card has become something of a ghost card. We see Jeter, we see Griffey, we see Bonds relatively frequently. Obviously, people have seen the sales prices on those and said, "Well, I'll put mine up for sale." But that Johnson, I mean, I think the image plays such a big role. That background, the stretch, I mean, that just it plays such a big role in the how iconic that card is, and I think people have come to realize that that it's something that you've got to hang on to. So I'm glad you got that one early. Let's talk a little bit about trades. So you like trades. Are you, when you see a card you like on Instagram, is your first thought, let me reach out, how can I trade for this? Or usually because of all these cards that you picked up before the boom, are the trade offers coming to you?
Yeah, so a little bit of both. I never, it's interesting. Not until recently was I somebody who I would say was a strong proponent of trading. I think a lot of times that there can be differences on value. If you're, I guess if you're buying a card, you agree on a value, and that's whatever it is, and it just comes down to is the seller negotiable or is the price that you can live with and make work? So buying and selling is probably a little bit easier. I think with trades though, one of the big advantages of it is you may have a really rare card, and maybe it's a card that means something to you or you have a bit of attachment to, but you would consider moving it for the right offer. But maybe you don't want to just sell it outright because what are you going to do with that money? If you don't have something else that you would actively pursue, is it really worth it to just sell it? But I think you have an advantage with trading because somebody might have something where the only way they would move it is if you have something they really want. So otherwise it's not for sale. And I think that's probably where trading can make more sense, especially when you're dealing with really rare cards, as long as both people are getting back something that they like or are happy with. So my real first big trade, and I know this is kind of the big topic of what we're discussing, was for the Frank Thomas PMG. And that was somebody kind of reaching out and approaching me and me considering, okay, well, this is a card I've been after. This is a card I really want. They just happen to have it. Can I live with giving up what it might take to get that? Understanding that this person may not want to just sell this card outright to me, and they're more interested in trading it because I have something they want. And so it was kind of that person reaching out to me, which is what kicked it off in a sense.
What and so let's talk about that trade. That's the 98 PMG of Frank Thomas, which is also one of the best cards in that set in my opinion. So, did the person who came to you about or with that card, did they come to you to say, "Hey, I have this. It's something you would like," or it's, "Hey, you have something I want. Here's what I've got for trade."
Yeah, so much more the latter. Basically, I had cards that they wanted, and it was kind of right after I had done a little reel with showing some of my favorite '90s cards, and I think that's kind of what kicked it off. Other people had messaged me after seeing that reel because it kind of showcased a bunch of '90s cards all in one spot on one little video. But this one person in particular, I had cards that he was interested in, and he basically said, "And I may have stuff that you might like." And then he just kind of messaged me, I would say maybe 9 to 10 photos of arguably each late '90s grails, and I'm like, wow, whoa, that okay. And it piqued my interest because a lot of times when somebody says, "Hey, I have something for trade," and they're kind of presuming what you might want or might like, and then you ask or they tell you, and you're kind of thinking to yourself, "No, that's not really what I'm looking for." But this guy had a bunch of cards that were all just top notch '90s cards, and one of them just happened to be the Frank Thomas. So I didn't even ask him about it. It just happened to be one of the cards out of his 8 to 10 or so that he impromptu sent to me. And obviously, once I saw that, it had been a card that I'd been after for some time, kind of got fixated on that. And I'm like, okay, what could I live with to in terms of parting with to try to make this happen, make this work?
So, when he came to you with that and you locked on to the idea of this Thomas is a real possibility for me now. And I assume you had some kind of process where you had to look at your current collection, those cards in the video, which obviously you loved or you wouldn't have taken a video of them, and said to yourself, which of these, which of these cards that I don't want to give up do I need to give up for the Thomas? And I think that was it a 3-for-1? Correct me
It
if I'm
was,
wrong.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
3 for 1.
Yeah, and so what were tell me about the cards you had to give up and what and how you kind of decided on those and how difficult it was to part with those.
Sure. So I knew in order to make the deal happen that I was going to have to give up at least one big card that was pretty important to me, and that would kind of get close to that value, and then some other cards to kind of sweeten the pot. One of the cards, obviously, I was asked about as part of that was the Randy Johnson, and I didn't say no outright, of course, but I knew in my mind that yeah, that wasn't going to be one. I was looking to make it available. I would have just regretted that too much and lamented that too much. So the other big one that he was really interested in was the Mark McGuire '98 PMG PSA 9, which we all know, getting a 9, especially for whatever reason, the PMGs from the baseball set is kind of a next to impossible. I think there's only 4 PSA graded '98 Mark McGuire PMGs. There are 2 PSA 9s, and that was one that I knew that I probably was going to have to give up to make this happen. I think I had already come to terms with being able to potentially let that card go because I had recently received a pretty good offer for that card, and I was kind of at the point where I was committed to selling it. The buyer kind of flaked out on it, and so we weren't able to consummate that transaction. But that helped me mentally realize that okay, I can if I was going to be able to sell that card, if I was mentally there where I would accept a certain amount of money to to sell that card, then certainly I can be willing to part ways with it and trade it for a card that's been on my want list now for quite some time. So that kind of helped with that mental acceptance, that mental process. And then it was just trying from there, knowing that that was going to be the centerpiece of the deal to get the Frank Thomas deal done, trying to figure out, okay, what other card or cards can I throw in there to maybe sweeten this deal where I'm not so attached to, and maybe the other person is getting a little bit more value on their side, but I reconciled it that I felt I was getting the best card of the deal and the card that was, going to be a centerpiece of my collection and most important to me. So that kind of helped through that process. But it's not easy. That was my first really big trade. And when you're dealing with values of, that start to really add up, I think anything where you're dealing with values around 10K or 10K plus, I mean, it's not easy, and you got to really try to mentally prepare yourself to make that happen.
Yeah, no question. Have you thought, since you've made the deal, obviously you're satisfied with it, any of the cards that you gave up, have you not necessarily regretted giving them up, but have you made it or thought about trying to reacquire any of them? Or is it sort of like, I had them for a while, they serve their purpose and I'm moving on?
Yeah, great question. I think there's always that initial lamentation where you're like, these cards really did mean something to me. They really were important to me. Um, Maybe I wish I didn't have to give them up to do that kind of deal, or maybe there was a different way to go about it, like consolidating. I mean, obviously there's been that idea that's become really popular where people may get a whole bunch of cards or cards that have less meaning to them to consolidate into bigger cards. That way they're not in that position where they're having to give up a card that means a lot to them or something really significant to them to them. But yeah, initially it was tough. The McGuire obviously was the toughest to give up. That card was a really big card. But I reconciled it where I don't know if that Thomas would have been available to me had I not made that card available, or had the guy, or would the guy be willing to sell it outright? Maybe he would have. I don't know. We didn't really talk about that. I didn't really broach it. So I think once you do that, um, you do just kind of have to mentally move on, and that's what I've done. So to answer a question about trying to reacquire them, no, haven't looked into doing that. If another McGuire were to come up for sale, would I be interested in it? Possibly, but I don't know how much of a push I would make to try to get that card, even if that circumstance were to arise. So that kind of helped me also reconcile my decision, and that it was the right move for me. And again, the Frank Thomas, I mean, it's just one that you never see come up. I mean, it may sell privately, but publicly, it's just not something that really moves a lot, and hasn't within the past 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, and you have to consider, obviously, we talked about this a lot, but that set and how revered it is and iconic it has become. And so the opportunity to get a card that's numbered to 50, where there's maybe half the copies out there, um, with the way that the market on those is growing, and we've seen some crazy sales in that set lately, that was probably your best opportunity to get the Thomas. And the fact that you're not, a player or team collector strictly, it gave you a little bit of latitude in kind of figuring out what in your PC you could pull from to acquire something that would have meant a lot to you when you were younger, because you were collecting Thomas. So I think I'm sure everybody listening would agree, you made the right move for you, regardless of what the quote unquote market value was, because as you said, you got a lot of those cards before the boom. And so truly, that's one of the things I wanted to ask you about, which is, whether it's in that deal or any deal, when you're thinking about the valuation of the cards, I assume it makes it a little easier to overpay. I'm using that in quotes, overpay, when you know that you got into those cards so much cheaper than what their market value is.
Yeah, no question. I think when you have a card or cards that you did have to really pay up for, it can be a lot more difficult to either move those or reconcile values, especially if you are into them for so much. But having acquired a lot of these things before the boom, it does make it a little bit easier because you you're invested in them, but you're not invested in them as much from a monetary standpoint. And so it, it's crazy to see what a lot of these have shot up to. I can't believe it in a sense. It's hard to reconcile. But to your point, I think it does make it a little bit easier when you're dealing with certain values and you're considering trades and understanding, okay, what makes sense and what can I move in and out, knowing that, yeah, I got this at a great price early on. And so it's that kind of opportunity cost, I think, that does make a difference.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Let's move on to the big Kahuna here. This is a trade you and I, I know about it, and you haven't really introduced it yet via Instagram. But before you kind of tell us the details of what was exchanged, how did this come about? Was it the seller, or well, I say not seller, the other party reaching out to you saying, "Hey, you have something I want," or did you see this card and say, "I got to go try and get that"?
Yeah, they reached out to me. It's Grant Slayton, Waldorf Stories on Instagram. I think everybody knows him. He's well known in the hobby for locating really rare cards. He's just he puts a lot of effort and time in doing that. And I had an opportunity to meet him recently at the Dallas Card Show, and we spoke at length about 90s cards, kind of like you and I are doing now, and just sharing stories and uh things of that nature. And he's got even more stories than I do. I mean, he can talk for days about about some of his escapades and acquiring some of the things he's acquired. But we got to meet there, and we made kind of what I would consider to be a smaller deal. I shouldn't say small, but smaller deal at that show. And then we kind of kept in contact since then, and he knew I really liked the '98 baseball PMG set, that I was a big fan of that. And he had recently come into kind of a number of cards from that set he got acquired as part of a big trade, and some others that I think he acquired through other means. And so he kind of reached out to me and he said, "Hey, I've got these cards. Are you interested?" And of course I was, being such a fan of that set and collector of some of the bigger names from that set. And so it kind of took off from there, where we ended up doing a very big deal, even more so than the Thomas PMG.
Well, I won't bury the lead too much here because I'm sure people are kind of eager to hear what the card was. So tell us a little bit. Well, tell us what the big card was, and obviously the two that you got with it first, and what it is about, like what it is about that particular card, that centerpiece card that you wanted, and why that one.
Yeah, so the card was 1998 Barry Bonds PMG, and I think it's probably without question one of the biggest cards from the set. I know there's a lot of strong opinions on Barry Bonds. He's kind of he's a divisive subject and a player. I think if you were to ask certain people, they tell you he's the best player to ever play the game, and then there's other people that would tell you no, but he's a fraud. He's this, he's that, the other. I mean, there's just always two sides of the coin, and there's probably some people in the middle who just can appreciate, everything he accomplished in his statistics, and even what he did before some of the controversy or allegations there. But Yeah, in terms of that card, I kind of look, and you and I have talked about this before, how you rank the players from that set, and I think it's an interesting topic. I think obviously, most people would say without question the Griffey and the Jeter are probably the top two cards from that set. Um, Jeter in particular with that iconic image of the Statue of Liberty in the background. I mean, it's such a just amazing card when you look at it. I mean, even if you don't like Jeter, you look at that card and you're like, wow, this card is something. But I think from there, Barry Bonds, arguably would be the third best card from that set, and it's a card that we've seen it, but it really hasn't sold publicly, except with an exception of one time in the past couple years, 2 or 3 years, and it's just a card that you see people, you see some that have it or whatnot, but just really isn't as widely available. I mean, I've seen the Griffey sell and transact much more, and even the Jeter a couple years ago was selling a decent amount, at least publicly. So I looked at that card and I was like, well, how many chances am I going to have to realistically get a card like that, which is such a big card from that set, a set that really has my appreciation has grown just tenfold over the past couple years. And so when it became available, I thought, well, I have some cards that, yeah, they do mean something to me and would be hard to part with, but what's going to be more significant to me, and I kind of made that assessment that card probably would be. So that's kind of how I came to that decision.
That's it. Yeah, I would say that image too, we can't sell it short with the Golden Gate Bridge in the background. And I just hit me that I think maybe you now have three of the top five cards in that set, like with Thomas and Johnson. I think there's a strong case for that. And then with that bonds, you also picked up the 98 PMGs of Clemens and Maddox, right?
That's right. Yep.
And so that's a really strong return package there. So what was it that what was the centerpiece of kind of what you traded to Grant, and how did you decide that that would be the biggest of the cards that you were willing to give up?
Yeah, so was the Jordan Noise Boys PSA 10, which is kind of ironic because that was kind of the card that kicked off my really delving into 90s card collecting. I acquired that card in early 2019, right before the boom, and paid, as you can imagine, a lot less than what it goes for now. So I, you know, it was tough, obviously, to give that card up, and obviously, we all know. I mean, Jordan PSA 10s. I mean, they just continue to appreciate in value and go up, especially of iconic cards like that, whether it be the '86 for rookie or a 1998 Jordan Noise Boys. But it is a card that if you want to get maybe not necessarily in a PSA 10, but in a lower grade like a PSA 9 or even a PSA 8, there's going to be opportunities available there. You're going to be able to have an opportunity to get that card with the Barry Bonds PMG, obviously serial number to 50, and there's probably even less of them out there floating around than 50 with a lot of these cards. Those opportunities just don't come up. And so understanding that those were the two biggest cards of the deal and comparing them that way, I think made it a little bit easier to reconcile. Even though obviously the Jordan Noise Boys was a big card to give up and not an easy card to give up, and it's a card that's very popular among
Yeah.
collectors, obviously.
But like you said, it's something you get back. And I think I mean, I would have done the same thing if I were you, because that Jordan, I mean, I think we've seen a run up on Jordan inserts for that might be unsustainable for the unnumbered stuff. And I think in particular, that card transacts frequently enough that price fluctuations can really damage its value in a trade. So I think it was wise to trade it now, while you could recoup uh, as much value as possible from it. But, talking through the details of this trade with you, it seemed like that wasn't the hardest card for you to give up in the deal. And there was one that was valued at much less, but was such a ghost that it was probably a little bit more difficult. Talk about that.
Yeah, so one of the other cards was a 98 Terrell Owens Fleer Brilliance 24 karat gold PSA 9 pop one. You just don't see that card ever in raw or any grade. I think there may be only one other PSA copy, and I think it might be like a 5 or something if I recall. So I got that card also back in, I want to say, around 2019. I mean, paid nothing for it. This, going back to what we were talking about earlier, this was when I was looking at other 90s cards, where the basketball was so expensive, so high priced, but some of these other sports like baseball and probably especially football just weren't. And so you could get a card like that for nothing, a couple
150
hundred, few
bucks.
hundred
Yeah.
dollars. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Just pennies on the dollar, really. And I had had that card for a while. Lots of people had messaged me about it. I hadn't considered moving it, wasn't interested in selling it. Um, and so the only real way that I was likely to move it was part of a trade. And it obviously was not easy to give up. I really liked that card, had it for a while. That one is obviously irreplaceable. You're gonna see that again or anything like that. So yeah, cards like that, like you said, they may not be worth as much, but they still are, have decent value, and especially when, it's not necessarily a 101, but it's almost the equivalent of it because it's a pop one in that grade in such a highly condition sensitive set, and a card that just never surfaces regardless in any condition. So yeah, that was a tough one for sure.
You know, it it's a good illustration of the point you made earlier, which was that um, it's something that you wouldn't be willing to sell, but when there's a trade, it's knowing that you have something that comes back that you like is important because, like you were saying, I'm the same way, which is like I used to think if why trade? I'll just sell it. I'd rather have the cash. But then what happens is we all are a little card addicted and we just go spend the cash on stuff that we don't really want. It's burning a hole in our pocket, and then we end up with selling the card that we liked and getting nothing really in return for it. So I think
Right.
that that's a good illustration of your point. And that Owens is a beautiful card, but you got to give up good stuff to get good stuff. And I think that's the thing that a lot of people try to forget. And that's the trouble I have with trading with people, which is that everybody wants to win the deal.
Yeah.
And I mean, and I say that not everybody. Like I've made a couple trades with some collectors, low value stuff, but once you start getting into that 5 to 10K stuff, and there's a dealer involved, or there's someone who's trying to hit a margin involved, it becomes so difficult to line up values, and it almost has to be like your situation where you got into them very, very low several years ago, because if not, I mean, you have to really, really want that card to be able to pay up for it. So that's I mean, an amazing deal. The fact that it got consummated at that level was really impressive. And I've heard he's pretty easy to trade with. So um, that's awesome, man. I Before we get into your favorite cards, I just wanted to ask you: is there anything else that you're targeting right now that somebody listening, if they have it, reach out to you without putting yourself on blast and exposing the small stuff you don't want people to know about. But
Yeah.
anything that you're actively searching for that we can crowdsource for you?
Yeah, I mean, obviously any rare Frank Thomas inserts. The I know you and I have spoken about it before. I mean, that Frank Thomas Essential Credentials now, the 98 out of 8 is a huge card. Um, I know of one guy who has it just because he posted it in one of the forums not too long ago. And he actually lives out in my area, and I see him all the time at shows. He probably didn't even know who I am. I've never even approached him about it because I know he's got to be a big. I know he's a big Frank Thomas collector and whatnot. At some point, I need to just say, hey, I saw you posted this card one time, and I just wanted to say, what a great card, awesome you have it. So that's a big one. I mean, you just got the 99 Bagwell Gem Master PMG, 101, which is awesome. I'm so happy for you, but I don't think I've never seen the Thomas surface, and I can't even imagine what that would be like if it were to. So that's more like a holy grail card that, pie in the sky type thing. But yeah, I mean, I'm always on the lookout for, 98 PMGs from the baseball, some of the bigger names and whatnot. I know we just saw a big sale of the Mariano Rivera last night, which was wow. I was like, that's, considering that same card sold for half just last year, it's really surprising what these are going for now. And um, I think you kind of made the point earlier. I mean, it's almost like the next one could be the next biggest sale, and they're just going to seemingly keep going back up in value because there's a lot of people that want them. They're very desirable. It's obviously the inaugural PMG set for baseball. So, it's kind of like one of those things. If you see your player, there's a certain one you want, maybe go after it because you don't know if you're going to get that chance again.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think like most of us love the PMGs, the credentials, the rubies from 98 and 97. So yeah.
The problem with that 98 set is that you've got the whales, the deep pockets involved. And, you know, in other sets, maybe more modern sets, you'd say the whales are involved because they spy an investment opportunity to flip it. I'm staying away. But here, they're collectors, right? I'm thinking of the Naz and the Nat Turners and those kind of guys who just have huge bank rolls that can go after these and influence the market. And certainly as we proceed over time, I'm not so sure that the certain inserts in the late 90s are a bubble of any kind. I think there are parallels too. I think there are plenty that are, but I think like 98 PMGs is a good example of one that isn't because of its popularity. So if you have some stars or some cool Frank Thomas cards, reach out to Adam, check out his page, maybe inquire about some of his rare stuff and see if a trade is in the works. But before we let you go, Adam, I want to do this. You have some crazy cards, and I'm going to make you do something very difficult, which is narrow it to your top 3 in your collection.
Yeah, sure. And I've got some here I could show them, or I could just tell them. I don't know how well they'll show up, but yeah.
Yeah, here you tell me, and what I'll do is for people watching on YouTube, I will put the images on the screen while Adam's talking about them.
Okay, yeah. So, and then we talked a little bit about it before. I would say that the Derek Thomas PMG Green, 97 PMG Green. I know I haven't mentioned him much. He's another person. So yeah, if anybody has a 24 karat gold of him, reach out to me. I love that card. But my collecting of him goes way back. It's how I became a Kansas City Chiefs fan. I was such a big fan of him in the 90s, wore his number 58 playing high school football. So that was a big card that was on my radar. And I had two chances to get it and missed out both times. And so the third time I wasn't going to let that happen. Basically, what happened was I think it was in 2022, toward the end of 2022. Um, One seller put up one Derek Thomas PMG green for sale. One hadn't surfaced in years, and I was like, oh my gosh. And you always have to worry about these because there's been a lot of aftermarket copies. Unfortunately, you've seen a lot of the uncut sheets where people will buy those and stamp them aftermarket, and so you always kind of have to worry about that. But one seller put up one for sale. I missed out on it. I was like the underbidder. I don't know how much the high bid on it was. And then without maybe a week or two later, the same seller had another one that he put up for sale. So clearly must have been a Derek Thomas collector because he had other Derek Thomas cards that he was also selling. And I missed out on that one again too, as the underbidder as well. So twice. And then, fortunately for me, last year, a guy who had been collecting a lot of these PMG greens was just seemingly liquidating all of his football PMG greens, and he listed it on PWCC Weekly. And I wasn't going to let that one slide this time around. So, probably, paid obviously a high price for it. I mean, I think it had sold for. Um, but it's one of two PSA sevens, highest graded. Just a card that I'd be surprised if we see again in anytime soon, even in the next 10 years. It's just something that'll never likely surface. It's so rare. So he's probably, because being a defensive player, some of these players aren't as heavily collected as some of the offensive players in football, like running backs, wide receivers, quarterbacks, and whatnot. So that's a big one, really, really big one, and kind of the centerpiece of my Derek Thomas collection. Um, Obviously, the other one would be the Frank Thomas PMG. I mean, that was a card I've been after for some time. Had opportunities to acquire it, just didn't materialize for whatever reason. So that not only getting that card, but also the way I acquired it and the story behind it, I think is really, really kind of neat and cool. So that would be definitely in the top three. And then another card that we've touched on would be the Randy Johnson PMG. Again, just having that personal connection to that card where I lived in Seattle. I acquired it when I was living in Seattle, living right next to the Space Needle, no less. Just that experience of going to tons of Mariners games when I was there, living out there. So having that one as well and the personal connection I have, it would definitely, I would say, probably be in the top three as well.
And that's quite the top three. I think that probably rivals a lot of people's top three out there, and I'm sure you've inspired a lot of 98 PMG envy over the course of this episode. But Adam, it was really fun having you on, and we definitely want to have you back in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a blast, man, and I'd love to come back anytime. This has been great.
Awesome. We'll see you later, man.
All right. Thanks for having
Some conversation there with Adam. Learned a lot about his likes, dislikes, 90s cards in general. Obviously, we have similar tastes, but this podcast focuses on 90s cards. And so, what better guest to have than him? So, if you have not yet, please follow us on Spotify and Apple. Subscribe to us on YouTube. This will be a video as well, which will showcase Adam's beautiful collection. But we will be back soon. Ryan has a very special episode that he's done a lot of research for, so looking forward to that. I hope you guys have a great 4th of July, and we'll see you soon.